Hey guys, Jxckal here. Today's video is going to be a really quick one on drum EQ, vocal EQ, and just a little bit of EQ in general. First thing I want to kind of point out is obviously there's a lot of people that do a lot of different things with EQ. So obviously what works for me won't necessarily work for you. So if something is working for you, stick with that and kind of just adapt from there. So the song I'm going to be using is called Let You Down from the album. The drums in the verse are kind of quite low key. A lot of low frequencies, and then when it gets to the chorus we pick up a lot more high frequencies to try and get a bit more energy in there. So I'll play you a quick snippet. Cool, so you get the idea with that. So I think the most important thing to start off with is to make sure that you're starting with a sample that you're reasonably happy with. There's no point putting 2 or 3, 4, 5, 6 EQs on a kick or a snare or instrument or whatever. You may as well just pick a different sample. So the kick that I'm starting with is almost exactly what I want to begin with. It's reasonably low frequency, it's got a good punch to it, good body, and it has quite a short range. Doesn't go on for very long, doesn't get in the way. So on this kick, the only thing I've got is a tiny little boost at 139, and that's just because of where I literally pull this up, play the kick. I think, yeah, okay, that sounds reasonably good. I think it's around the second resonant frequency. There's usually one under 100, probably around here, 65, which makes sense that the boost around 130 is the next kind of resonant point. So that's literally it. Then that's the kick. I just knew I wanted a little bit more body on that. The sample's already doing most of the work for me. And again, it goes for the same kind of thing with the tom drums. This tom one has nothing on it. It's completely dry as it is. Slightly pitched down. That's about it. No EQ. Second one has a tiny bit of reverb on it. That's all, just to make it sit in that mix. If I turn that off, it's a touch dry. It doesn't really sit in the mix quite as well. You have the reverb on. Just gives a little bit of extra space. And that is the whole, for the verse, that's all that you have. So starting with good samples is by far the most important thing. Moving on to the chorus drums. Again, very little on, I have nothing on the kick. The kick is dry. Really punchy kick, because I know I want energy. The snare, pretty straightforward. Has a little bit of EQ to give it a little bit more air. I want a little more fizz to it, and then again just a little bit more reverb to help it sit in the space a little better. If I take both of those off, you can hear it sounds dry. It sounds a little too close to you. You put both of them on, has that high end, that fizz, that space, that atmosphere. Just wanted to quickly jump in here while I was editing the video and point out that if you're not as lazy as me, what you should be doing is taking out a lot of the low end that isn't contributing to a sound. That'll help make the mix a lot cleaner. So you should do this on every track. So basically just start with a high pass and sweep it up until you're only cutting out the parts that, you can see there's frequencies down here that really aren't contributing at all to the sound of the snare. So if we cut some of those out, probably to about here, you can see this is the first real resonance point for the snare. So we don't want to go too far above. If we go too far above that, suddenly it sounds thin, doesn't hit as hard. Pull it back to about there. Then we've just gained a little bit more room here, so when you're mixing, when you're mastering, you've got a little bit more space to work with. You can push the track a little bit louder, you can add in an extra instrument, you could push the kick a little harder, for example, because this is maybe where you're going to want it to be kick dominated. So if you're not as lazy as me, do that. There's nothing on either of the hi-hats. There's just one bounce snare that sits throughout the mix. That again has little EQ on just to take off anything. There's not going to be anything there, but just for the sake of cleaning it up, make sure there's nothing in the low end. and taking a little bit high end off because I don't want it to sit at the front of the mix. You know, I don't want it to sit in front of this snare here. I want it to sit behind that bigger snare. So if I were to take these off, for example, you can hear them clash. Like they're both trying to fill that same space. So I just put that on to sit it a little further deeper in the mix and sit it behind that. I think that's pretty much it. You know, I don't use too much EQ. The main trick that I actually use for drums in particular is the drum bus. So everything gets routed, all of my drums, you know, the kick side chain, some other things are side chained. The main thing is that all of the drums get routed to this one drum bus, and what I've been using recently is a plugin called Smack Attack Stereo. So you literally just up the attack. It's just a transient processor, so it pulls the transients up or down depending on what you ask it to do. So all I'm asking it to do here is pull the first transient up and then leave the rest as is. So it just gives you a little more bite to the drums, a little more snap. Kind of makes them stand out of the mix a little more, because that's kind of what I wanted with this track. So if I mute this, you can hear. Now you can probably only hear this with headphones, but if I turn it on. I'll flick it on and off for you. Notice how everything's a little more kind of crisp, a little more bite to it. The kick in particular and the hats really stand out to me. It's getting that little extra bit of sharpness. So now moving on to the vocal section of the video. So for EQ on vocals, I'll go through the whole chain on the actual vocal video. But as far as the EQ goes, I literally just have a subtractive EQ at first. So I'm taking off everything below 90. It's usually around a sweet spot I find personally. You can go up to 120, go down to 75, depends on where your vocal range is. I take out a lot of this mid-range stuff and a tiny bit you probably can't even notice at 1700. And all of these I find just from literally raising one point up. And on my shoulder, I just don't say shit. And swiping it along and seeing what I like or don't like. She telling me everything. Reminding me how I ain't gonna wear the ring. And I've had a few people recently ask me what boxiness sounds like. So this is the kind of thing I look for. And on my shoulder, I just don't say shit. So you can tell that frequency is resonating with the microphone. She telling me everything. And it really dominates the tone of the vocal. So if we bring this out. And on my shoulder, I just don't say shit. She telling me everything, reminding me how I ain't gonna wear the ring. We're sounding much cleaner. So the other main EQ that I do is an additive EQ, just after some more compression. I'm taking out a tiny bit on the low end, maybe it's a dB or so. Yeah, a dB. With just a flat shelf on the low end, and then I'm boosting some frequencies that I like and cutting nearby. I find that works quite well if you cut somewhere, then boost next to it. You don't lose too much of the body of the vocal. So it sounds. And on my shoulder, I just don't say shit. So the reason I do this here is, again, I just sweep through, pick out a frequency, and I realise. And on my shoulder, I just don't say shit. She telling me everything. So this particular frequency, I'm like, yeah, I like that with my voice. It sits well with the microphone. And again, the same thing with this part. Not a big fan of this. And on my shoulder, I just don't say shit. Sounds buff. You know, that part sounds kind of muffled, boxy. Doesn't really work for me. So that's kind of it for the vocal EQ part of the video. I will do a separate video on the whole kind of vocal chain, vocal processing. So I've had some questions about that. If you do have any questions about this video or about EQ in general, just drop them in the comments or drop me a DM on Instagram. It's at Jxckal_UK. And I'll see you guys next time. See ya. Down. I never meant to let you down.